Why, aloha! It's Eric and Julie with 365 Hawaii. And today we've got an interesting discussion for you guys. And Julie was
interviewed today by a reporter who actually writes for CNBC, and she's going to be releasing an article about the economics of how Governor Iggy's declaration of telling people not to come to the island until after the end of October is affecting the local economy. The Wall Street Journal posted a article. I'm going to just read this headline. When Hawaii asked tourists to postpone, many listened, and that's created new stresses. With trips getting delayed until 2022, hospitality workers face reduced hours and wages.
Today, here we are in Coconut Grove, and it is completely quiet compared to what it normally is for that. So it just shows that September is also that.
Well, let me talk about when you say normally.
Yeah.
Also, go into the fact that we have been slammed since February, all the way until about 2 weeks ago. And seasonality-wise, it is September. It's a little bit lower. But right now, it's feeling very good out there.
It's quiet, yes.
It's very quiet.
It kind of reminds me a little of the pandemic, a little bit.
Right, and so that's when we said, it's interesting to talk about what happens when.
And it was so exaggerated because before that was this great crush starting in April.
Right, so economically, that was really good for our business owners. It was almost too much, though, because the employees were exhausted.
Well, the employees,
they
didn't have enough employees back.
Right, and then there was all kinds of issues. In fact, some of those issues included.
Yeah, she wrote them down.
I wrote them down. Carmageddon, if you guys remember this, where because of the pandemic, we didn't have enough rental cars in all of Hawaii. And so this was happening on all the islands where all of a sudden car rental prices started shooting up to the point where it was complete gouging at $175.
But more than that, sometimes like $200 and $300.
Yeah, especially in Oahu, it was crazy. Yeah. So, of course, how does that affect locals? Well, when we wanted to go to Kauai, we ended up paying double for the car.
Yeah.
Within the course of a few weeks after we'd booked it, all of a sudden the car prices were going nuts. And then also we wanted to go to Oahu just a couple weeks ago, and somebody said, well, they're renting cars for $300 a day. We're like, oh, we're not going to Oahu.
But just put things in perspective now, we're in this lull in September, and with these different things, cars are $30 a day. So
right. Well, what happened, what we learned, and you're going to run a little clip, I think, was that we had no rental cars here after the pandemic closed the island down. And then during February to July, you couldn't get a rental car, prices up to $150 a piece. So what did the rental car companies do? They got a whole bunch of new cars. And so here we're talking about a little bit of tourism and the economy. A bunch of the locals had gone out and bought cars, put them on Turo, and they were making a mint. And then these guys come in, bring the cars back in. Obviously, the prices go down. So it's an interesting experience what happens with the economy and tourism when things like that occur. And then the reservations for restaurants. So the locals were really going, what happened here? Because of the 50% capacity experience because of COVID, we have less ability to serve more people.
And I don't know if all the restaurants open there. We've lost a couple on top of that.
Yeah, but it was mostly because of 50% capacity problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then now...
And hours is what I was thinking.
Right, well, now the hours have dropped significantly on a lot of these different restaurants because... And this is happening across the country. There's just not enough people to work in hospitality. We had 8,000 people leave the island during the whole Hawaiian Island chain. But how did the reservation problem affect everybody? Was people with special events couldn't get their birthday dinners at the Canoe House or Merriman's or whatever. Yeah. But also then it came to me and my friends saying, well, let's go down, let's say to Jackie Ray's. And we show up there and they say, I'm sorry, it's an hour and a half wait.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So that's another thing. And then the parking.
Yeah, parking for, going to the beach, not being able to get any parking. Parking downtown, of course, and or just traffic in general, parking and traffic, right? I mean, it was, the highway was quite packed is what it was. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then the grocery stores
ran out of food. Yeah. They weren't expecting quite so many people here, and they weren't able to ship quite enough food here. And
right.
So they go there and get all cleared out in one area.
Yeah, you know what? I'm telling you guys, I think that I speak for a lot of people who live in Hawaii in general. Shocking, the amount of tourists that came from March to July.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have some numbers for you on that, too. And then the hotels, the rooms doubled their prices.
Yeah, everyone wanted to go, and there was no room.
Yeah, so what they did was to try and like deal with the fact that they didn't have enough employees, and they had so much interest in going into the properties that we had some friends here in June, and these guys needed a place to stay, and we ended up putting them up at the Sheraton, and they were there for 10 days.
Yeah,
it was $5,000.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of money.
$5,000 to get the Sheraton.
Yes, it was.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So we've got all of these things going on. And so this brings us to, what happens with tourism? What are the effects? Now we know the effects of it, but is there anything that can be done? And, we know that there's a push here locally that, people would like not to have quite the amount of tourism that we have. All right, so I got some numbers here from the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And we have $18 billion annually, in 2019 that were spent, and that was the biggest year that they had. 2021 was a little bit below that, but that's still a pretty big number any way you cut it. And then we had 10 million people during that year as well. And I'm curious to see what the numbers are going to be this last year, because there was a lot of people that came here.
10 million visitors arrived here.
Yeah, for an island that doesn't have that many people on there, that's a lot of that. And the other thing that's interesting is that tourism comprises of more than 20% of the entire economy. And I think it might even be bigger than that, because that's just just people that work in the industry, but there's a lot of things that support through third party, the plumbers and the things like that have to do it as well.
Right.
So those are our hard numbers.
Okay. And then, so that's the economic benefits, you could say. Right.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about when 10 million people show up to the Hawaiian Islands. What really happens?
Yeah. Well, I think the funniest one, well, it's not funny, it was serious, but, they overwhelmed the Maui airport, and it was above capacity. And so they, had trouble getting the planes in and not enough people to get there.
Well, and also
going through the airport.
Right, because when Eric and I went down, I went through Maui airport when this was happening, and people there was no place to sit down. And the restaurants were the line to get in Starbucks was like 60 people deep, and my friends that were showing me photos of themselves standing in line at the TSA security lines, they sat there for 2.5 hours trying to get through security to get to their planes. So the mayor had asked the airlines to pull back from some of their flights, which, capitalism. But people were saying the federal government should have stepped in because they were over capacity at that airport.
Right. And one of the other things it really is that when there's that many people, then it makes it easier to do, vacation rentals versus renting to somebody that is locally live on the island. And because they can make so much more on a vacation rental. So it makes it, tends to suck up the housing. But we'll get into that because that falls under the STV bar section of it, but
right.
It's interesting.
But one of the things that we're talking about, and this is why it's the locals, and it's not just me and Eric talking about, oh, we can't get a hotel reservation, or we can't get a restaurant reservation, or oh, we have to wait in line a little bit longer, or we can't get onto a beach. It does have real resource impact. One of the things that happened was because there were so many people on Maui at one time, and we're having kind of a little bit of a drought on the state, that they were actually running out of water in Maui. And so the residents were kind of upset that they can't get their own water while they're also trying to provide water for millions of other tourists.
Yeah.
And then also the crush on the coral reefs. Well, you guys know I'm a big proponent of reef safe sunscreen. But during the shutdown, there were so many minnows all over, and it looked like the bays and the marine life were making a really strong comeback. And I was out snorkeling today, and I saw like 10 minnows. It's just, again, when people say, does it really make an impact? It does. I've seen it personally from the time I spent on the reefs during the time that the lockdown was happening versus even now. Right? So, and also people all over the islands are saying when so many people are on the trails at the same time, or they're trying to go in places they're not supposed to. Maui is now famous for how much they're really upset that the tourists park illegally on the roads in Hana, and then they can't get through. And we've seen situations where here at our area at the Honolulu Bay, you guys might know it as two-step, people parking illegally, blocking driveways of the locals. And when that starts to happen, the level of frustration and anger starts to rise. And so I think that's another reason we're doing this video too, is just to let you know where everyone kind of is coming from, right?
Yeah, and that hope we get you an idea of that. So now our next topic of this is, where are we going with it? we've done a pretty good job of talking about how sort of depressing it is with over tourism, which is kind of what our goal was, at least to give you an idea of what was going on here. But there seems to be some light in the tunnel, some plans getting forward, and by going through this, there's people looking at things differently, which means that hopefully we might be able to come up with a plan that might be successful in mitigating some of the problems that we had before, right? And I don't know if we can ever fix the overall question is tourism something that you can change dramatically?
Well, remember we talked about what HTA is changing themselves into?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yes. And why don't we get into that now?
Okay. So, if you first of all, if you don't know, what we talk about HTA, Hawaii Tourism Authority, their job has been since they were formed to bring more people to the island.
And they did a phenomenal job.
They did, and they market internationally, and that's their big thing. And so now people are saying your job is, you've done too good of a job, and what can you do now to kind of help mitigate this issue?
Yes. So, what's being done, and we can start with. You want to start with HTA because that sounds like I got a couple of them. All right. So HTA, you had a good one. What the?
And we'll put some of these links that we're putting this information from down in the description. But I was reading a story about one of the gentlemen that works for HTA. I think he's the cultural director. He was talking about how their goal had been to be a destination marketing organization. And now they're saying we should be a destination management organization.
Right, and they've got quite a few. They're revamping their
right. So they have a strategic plan, and they've released it for all the islands except for Oahu right now. And they're trying to figure out ways to basically do intentional tourism. So that way it has a little bit more of a management aspect of it all. And so maybe as we get into the future of like more of these videos, we can talk to you a little bit more about the points of that.
Right. And then the other one we were talking about earlier was the STVRs. And what used to happen here is that there was no control over where the rentals were or what happened like that. So we had quite a few rentals that were houses that people could make so much money on their houses that why would they rent them to a nobody when they can make $10,000 a month renting out their house. So they have clamped down on people that have rentals in the non-rental area, the residential areas, not condo areas and not resort areas, and so that has been fairly successful. And they so now if you were to have your place rented out as a vacation rental, you have to be primarily in the condo area down by the ocean is primarily where it is. But that has removed probably 20% of the excess rentals out there. I mean I'm taking a guess at it, but it's taken quite a few of them off, which makes it a little harder for these people to quick get a cheap Airbnb to come here to make it happen.
Right, because one of the things that the whole state has decided is that they would rather have fewer tourists spending more money while they're here every day they're here.
And luckily, we know you guys. If you guys are watching this video, you guys are golden. Because that's what we try to keep everybody happy and do as best. Our job is to make things try to make things better here.
Right, and so like some of the things that when we ask people who want to move here is we say if you're going to come, you have to give back to the island. In some way, you have to. And I had mentioned this. Let me tell that story.
Sure.
When this was starting to happen last fall, there was a rumor that HTA or the government in some level was going to say, if you come to visit Hawaii, you're going to have to do something to give back. Right, and that's either increased use fees, which they're already implementing in Oahu, an overall incoming fee, which they've implemented. They're going to do that as soon as a $20 like green fee that will go to help resource mitigation, but also to encourage people to volunteer while they're here and visit farms and be a little bit more intentional with the tourism.
Sure.
Of actually learning a little bit more about Hawaii, the culture, and to be basically better tourists. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't complain about that. That sounds like a nice plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of the other ones are they were proposing a green fee. This is the state legislation, if I'm correct.
Right.
Right. That it would be was it $20?
$20.
$20 for everybody that comes into Hawaii that would go towards initiatives towards helping out the impacts of tourism.
Right.
You know, that go along with that. And then the other one locally here that's kind of interesting that just came up recently is that they just enacted, they've been talking about this for many years, but it finally happened this August. And that was that they are not allowing groups, tour boats to swim with dolphins. You have to stay at least 50 yards away from the dolphins, which is, you know, pretty significant. And they've been talking about it for a while, but I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a period of time we look over the bay and there might have been 20 boats with, you know,
hundreds
20
of
people in every boat, and it was just crazy.
Yeah.
So it's a good one to see that at least that has been enacted or in the process of being enacted.
Yeah, right. So they passed a resolution on August 30th, and it's supposed to go into effect 30 days afterwards. So that's coming up any time now. So and I know that there's people saying that the dolphins need to rest, but I'll tell you though, because I love dolphins, that I think they miss the people. During the lockdown, but now the boats will be.
But it will be on their term. And there's still a couple people out there, but they got a chance to do it, not having 5,000 people.
Right.
Up
There's always a fine line.
Yeah.
But now that they'll be doing like dolphin viewing boats, like they do that in Oahu.
Yeah.
Right.
So now they've got kind of a plan going, and the big question we have is what's going to happen moving forward. And unfortunately, we, as in 365, don't have a crystal ball. And we're just all we're doing is we're a couple of small people that are just commenting from what it looks like to be.
Well, and also we live here.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So you guys get the kind of like the inside scoop from business owners like ourselves.
Yeah.
And our daughter, she and my son, they both work in hospitality. And so my son has been getting less tips because we have less people here. And this is what we're talking about to start this video off with, was when Iggy said, don't come, how does that impact the islands economically? And so we were talking about the fact that with a few less people here, it kind of gives everyone a chance to breathe. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
But when we're talking about what's going to happen after the end of October as we head into the fall season, well, what we didn't mention, too, is the fact that they canceled Ironman this year.
That was a big one, too.
Right? And we were supposed to have that within the next, 2.5 weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings millions of dollars into the economy here in Kona, and we won't be having that for the second year in a row. And so now as we're moving into November and December, I think the big question is,
what's going to happen?
So I did ask a bunch of people on my 365 Things to Do in Kona page about their travel plans, and a few people said that they were canceling their trips in November because at that time we had a pretty big surge of COVID here on the islands, and it looks like we're finally kind of getting a handle a little bit on that. But it's been an interesting experience living through this with the tourism, right?
Yeah.
So we get a chance to see what happens when we have too many, what happens when we don't have enough. So there's got to be a middle ground somewhere.
Well, that's where it is, and it's for everybody to figure out what is the middle ground.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and what makes everybody happy.
Right.
But at least we're trying to bring it up so you guys get a chance to at least think about.
Yeah, and maybe 2 or 3 years from now, when we're looking back at this video, that somehow the state has managed to create this utopian experience where I don't know. You got to make a reservation to come and see a lot of the things. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, they do that for Haleakala. And so, I don't know. People in my group are like, we're doing the best we can. We can only travel for 3 months out of the year. We can't say we're going to just come in November when we usually come in January. So, answers are far and few between. And but the thing is at least if people start talking about it, maybe there's a way that we can create a plan that makes everybody happy, including the islands.
Yep. And with that, we'll say
Aloha.
365 Hawaii. What do you need to do?
Subscribe! And if you are feeling so inclined, we have a new Patreon set up, and we would appreciate your support. And so we can provide more awesome content, and you can get some fabulous gifts and prizes, and help us keep giving you guys the good stuff.
You can reach us on the web at 365kona.com.
.com. Aloha.